If you could change one life tonight, would you choose yours or someone else's? The question hung in the air longer than it should have, soft but deliberate, like it carried weight far beyond a casual conversation. The diner was nearly empty now, just past 9:40 p.m., the late-night crowd still minutes away, and the hum of the old refrigerator behind the counter filled the silence between them. Lily Harper paused mid-step, her hand still wrapped around a ceramic coffee mug that had long gone cold, her fingers slightly red from a 12-hour shift that had started before sunrise. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. The man sitting at booth 7 didn't look like anything special at first glance, plain dark jacket, worn jeans, the kind of face you might pass on the street without a second thought, but there was something about the way he watched her, calm, steady, almost too observant. "I'm sorry," she said, forcing a polite smile, the kind she had practiced 1,000 times for customers who tipped $2 on a $50 bill. He leaned back slightly, folding his hands together on the table, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Just a question," he said. "If you had one shot to make a difference tonight, would you take it for yourself, or give it to someone who needs it more?" Lily let out a small, tired breath, glancing toward the kitchen where the flickering fluorescent light buzzed faintly, then back at him. "That's not exactly a normal question," she replied, a hint of nervous laughter slipping through, though her shoulders remained tense. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the glass windows, streaking the neon reflections into blurred colors that painted the diner in quiet melancholy. She set the mug down gently in front of him, her fingers brushing against a folded receipt tucked under the edge of his plate, noticing, like she always did, that he hadn't touched most of his food. "People usually ask for more coffee," she added softly. He smiled faintly at that, but didn't look away. "Maybe I'm not here for coffee," he said. The words should have felt strange, but somehow they didn't. Lily swallowed, her mind drifting for just a second to the unpaid hospital bill sitting folded in her locker, the red-stamped notice she hadn't had the courage to open again, the memory of her mother's tired smile that morning when she promised everything would be okay. It wasn't okay. Not even close. And yet, standing here under flickering lights with sore feet and a paycheck that barely covered rent, she still found herself hesitating, not because she didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud made it real. She looked at him again, really looked this time, noticing the quiet intensity in his eyes, the way he seemed to be waiting not just for a response, but for something deeper, something honest. "Why would anyone choose someone else?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. He didn't answer. He just watched her, as if the silence itself was part of the test. Lily's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the table, her gaze drifting toward the far corner of the diner where an older couple sat sharing a single plate, their whispered conversation barely audible over the hum of the room. She had seen people like them every night, people stretching dollars, making sacrifices, holding on in ways no one else noticed. And something inside her shifted, subtle but undeniable. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, steadier, like she had already made the choice long before this moment. "I think," she began, her breath catching for just a second, "I think if you're given the chance to help someone who's hurting more than you take it." The man in booth 7 didn't move, but something changed in his expression, something almost imperceptible, like a door quietly opening behind his eyes. And for the first time that night, Lily felt like this wasn't just a question anymore. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet see, but was already part of. The man did not respond right away, and that silence stretched just long enough for Lily to feel the weight of her own words settle into the room, like something she could not take back even if she wanted to. She shifted slightly on her feet, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of how tired she must look under the harsh overhead lights. "That is a generous answer," he said finally, his voice calm but carrying something deeper now, something that felt less like curiosity and more like evaluation. Lily let out a quiet breath and gave a small shrug. "It is not generous," she said, her tone soft but honest. "It is just what feels right." He nodded once, as if confirming something only he understood, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple folded envelope, placing it gently on the table between them. The motion was deliberate, controlled, and for a brief second Lily felt her chest tighten with uncertainty. "What is that?" she asked, glancing down at it but not touching it. "A choice," he replied. "Inside is $10,000. Cash." Lily blinked, certain she had misheard him. The hum of the diner seemed to fade, replaced by the sudden rush of her own heartbeat in her ears. "That is not funny," she said quietly, her voice dropping as she searched his face for any sign of a joke. There was none. "I am not joking," he said. "You can take it. Walk out tonight, pay your bills, fix whatever is weighing you down. No strings attached." Lily stared at the envelope now, her fingers instinctively tightening at her sides. $10,000. It was more than she made in months. It could cover rent. It could cover the hospital. It could give her mother time. Real time. Her throat felt dry. "And the other option?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You give it away," he said. "To someone in this room who needs it more than you." Lily let out a faint, disbelieving laugh, though it carried no humor. "You cannot be serious," she said. "You are asking me to choose between saving my own life and what? Proving a point." "I am asking you to choose," he replied simply. The words landed heavier than anything else he had said. Lily swallowed hard, her gaze drifting again across the diner, this time slower, more deliberate. The older couple in the corner. A delivery driver counting coins near the counter. A young mother sitting alone with a sleeping child, her eyes tired, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee she had not touched. Lily felt something twist in her chest. She thought of the envelope again. The hospital bill. Her mother's voice that morning, weak but still trying to sound strong. "Do not worry about me, sweetheart." She closed her eyes for just a second, just long enough to feel the pull in two directions, one loud and urgent, the other quiet but steady. When she opened them again, they landed on the young mother. Without fully realizing she had made the decision, Lily reached out, picked up the envelope, and held it for a brief moment, her fingers trembling slightly as if the weight of it was more than paper. Then, slowly, she turned and walked across the diner. Each step felt louder than it should have, her heartbeat matching the rhythm of her movement. When she reached the table, the young mother looked up, surprised. Lily forced a small, gentle smile and placed the envelope down in front of her. "I think you need this more than I do," she said softly. The woman blinked, confused, then shaken, her eyes filling with something between disbelief and relief. Behind her, back at booth 7, the man watched in complete silence, but this time, there was no question left in his eyes. Only certainty. For a moment, the diner seemed to stop breathing. The young mother stared down at the envelope as if it might disappear if she blinked too fast, her fingers hovering just above it, unsure if she was allowed to touch something that did not feel real. I cannot take this," she said finally, her voice trembling, but Lily gently pushed it closer. "Yes, you can," Lily replied, her tone steady despite the quiet storm building inside her chest. "It is yours." The woman's lips parted, her eyes filling with tears she could no longer hold back, and she placed a hand over her sleeping child's back as if grounding herself in something certain. "You do not even know me," she whispered. Lily offered a small, almost tired smile. "I do not need to," she said softly. "I can see enough." For a second, neither of them moved, and then the woman slowly picked up the envelope, holding it against her chest as if it was something fragile, something sacred. "Thank you," she breathed, the words barely audible but heavy with meaning. Lily nodded once, not trusting herself to say anything else, and turned back toward the counter, her steps slower now, quieter, as if she had left something behind that she could not get back. When she returned to booth 7, the seat was empty. The plate was gone. The coffee cup had been cleared. Only the faint imprint on the cushion and a neatly folded receipt remained, sitting exactly where the envelope had once been. Lily's heart sank, not because she expected anything in return, but because the moment felt unfinished, like a conversation cut off too soon. She reached for the receipt, her fingers brushing against the paper, and paused when she noticed something written on the back in clean, precise handwriting. Thank you for reminding me what matters. Her brows furrowed slightly as she read it again, slower this time, trying to understand why those words felt heavier than they should. Lily, a sharp voice cut through the quiet, pulling her back into reality. She turned to see her manager, Carl, standing near the register, arms crossed, his expression already edged with irritation. "What was that?" he asked, gesturing toward the corner where the young mother still sat, clutching the envelope. Lily hesitated. "Just helping someone," she said carefully. Carl let out a short, humorless laugh. "Helping someone," he repeated. "You just gave away something at my tables, did not you?" "It was not yours," Lily replied, her voice calm but firm. His eyes narrowed. "That is not the point. This is a business, not a charity," he snapped, stepping closer. "You think you can just play hero on my floor?" Lily swallowed, keeping her posture steady even as her pulse quickened. "I did what I thought was right," she said quietly. Carl shook his head, his frustration boiling over into something louder now. "What is right does not pay the bills, Lily," he said. "And it definitely does not keep this place running." The words hit closer than she wanted to admit, but she did not back down. Instead, she tightened her grip on the receipt in her hand, the ink pressing faintly into her skin. Across the diner, the young mother stood up slowly, still holding the envelope, her eyes meeting Lily's for just a second in silent gratitude before she gathered her child and walked out into the rain. Lily watched her go, something inside her both aching and settling at the same time. Behind her, Carl exhaled sharply. "Clock out," he said. "We will talk about this tomorrow." Lily nodded without arguing, already reaching for her apron, her movements automatic now. As she untied it, her gaze drifted back down to the receipt one more time. "Thank you for reminding me what matters." She did not know who he really was. She did not know why he had asked that question. But for some reason, she had the feeling that this was not the end of it. Not even close. The rain had not stopped by the time Lily stepped out of the diner, the cold air wrapping around her like a reminder of everything she had just walked away from, and for a moment she stood under the flickering awning, staring at the empty street as if expecting something to change, as if the night itself might explain what had just happened, but nothing did. It was just the same quiet city, the same distant headlights passing by, the same weight in her chest that felt both heavier and strangely lighter at the same time, and she let out a slow breath before pulling her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and starting the 3-block walk to the bus stop, her shoes damp against the pavement, her mind replaying every second of that conversation, the question, the envelope, the look in his eyes, and most of all the way he had watched her walk away without saying a single word, like he already knew exactly what she would do before she did it herself, and that thought lingered with her. Longer than she expected, long enough that she almost missed the bus pulling up in front of her, its brakes hissing softly as the doors opened, and she climbed on quietly, dropping her last few dollars into the fare box without thinking, her fingers hesitating for just a second when she realized how little she had left now, but she said nothing, just moved to a seat near the window and sank into it, watching the rain streak across the glass as the city blurred into soft lights and shadows, her reflection faint and tired in the window. And for the first time that night, the reality of her situation pressed in fully, the unpaid bills, the hospital call she had been avoiding, the fear she had been pushing down for weeks now rising slowly to the surface, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting her head rest lightly against the cool glass, whispering under her breath, "I hope that was the right choice," though she did not expect an answer, but somehow, deep down, she already knew it was, even if it cost her everything, even if tomorrow looked exactly the same as today. And when the bus finally stopped near her apartment building, she stepped off into the rain again, walking the short distance down a narrow sidewalk lined with dim streetlights until she reached the old brick building she called home, its entrance worn and quiet, the kind of place no one noticed unless they had to. And as she pushed open the door and stepped inside, the familiar smell of old carpet and distant cooking wrapped around her, grounding her back into reality, and she moved quickly up the stairs, her steps light but tired, until she reached the 3rd floor and paused in front of her door, taking a breath before unlocking it and stepping into the small apartment, where the only light came from a single lamp near the couch and the soft glow of a television playing quietly in the background, and there, sitting in a recliner by the window, wrapped in A thin blanket was her mother, her posture slightly hunched but her eyes warm as they lifted to meet Lily's the moment she walked in. "You are late," her mother said gently, a faint smile forming despite the exhaustion in her voice, and Lily felt her chest tighten again, not with fear this time, but with something softer, something deeper, and she stepped forward quickly, kneeling beside her, brushing a hand over her mother's arm as if to reassure herself she was still there, still real. "Long shift," Lily said quietly, forcing a small smile in return, though her eyes betrayed the storm she was holding back, and her mother studied her for a moment, as if sensing everything Lily was not saying. Before reaching out and placing her hand over Lily's, her touch light but steady, "You did something tonight," she said softly, not a question but a knowing, and Lily froze for just a second, her breath catching as she looked up, surprised. "How do you know that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, and her mother smiled again, this time a little deeper, a little sadder. "Because you look like someone who gave something away," she replied, and the words hit harder than anything else. Had that night, settling into Lily's chest with a quiet certainty that she could not explain, and for the first time since leaving the diner, Lily felt the weight of her decision shift into something else entirely, something that felt less like loss and more like meaning, even if she could not yet see where it would lead, even if the world outside still felt uncertain, because in that small, dim apartment, with her mother's hand wrapped around hers, there was something steady, something real. And for now, that was enough. The next morning arrived too quickly, the pale grey light slipping through the thin curtains of Lily's apartment as if it had no regard for how little sleep she had actually gotten, and for a moment she lay still on the narrow couch, staring up at the ceiling, her mind already awake before her body could catch up, replaying the night before in fragments that refused to settle into something simple or easy, the envelope, the choice, the look in that stranger's eyes, and the quiet certainty that she had stepped into something bigger than she understood, but there was no time to sit with it, no time to question it, because reality moved faster than reflection, and the faint sound of coughing from the bedroom pulled her up almost instantly, her feet hitting the cold floor as she moved quickly down the short hallway, her heart tightening as she reached the doorway and saw her mother sitting up slightly, one hand pressed gently against her chest, her breathing shallow but controlled. "Hey. Hey, I am here," Lily said softly, crossing the room in 2 quick steps and kneeling beside the bed, her hand finding her mother's shoulder, steady and warm, and her mother managed a small smile, though it carried a weight Lily could not ignore. "It is just a little tightness," she said quietly, brushing it off like she always did, but Lily knew better. She had seen the signs, heard the warnings from doctors who spoke in careful, measured tones, and she forced herself to stay calm, to keep her voice steady even as fear crept up her spine. "Did you take your medication?" she asked, already reaching for the small plastic organizer on the nightstand, checking the compartments with practiced precision, and her mother nodded faintly. "I did," she said, her voice softer now. "You worry too much," and Lily let out a small breath that almost turned into a laugh, though it did not quite make it. "That is my job," she replied gently, handing her a glass of water and waiting until she took a few slow sips, watching every movement as if it mattered more than anything else in the world, because right now, it did. And when her mother settled back against the pillows, her breathing easing just enough to loosen the tight grip around Lily's chest, there was a brief moment of quiet, a fragile pause where everything felt suspended between what was and what might be, and Lily sat there a little longer than she needed to, her hand still resting lightly over her mother's, her thumb brushing gently against her skin as if grounding both of them in something steady, something real, and then, almost without thinking, her gaze drifted to the stack of unopened envelopes on the dresser, each one stamped in bold red letters that did not need to be read to be understood, final notices, overdue balances, reminders that time was running out in ways she could not control, and her stomach tightened again, the weight of those choices pressing back in, louder now in the daylight than they had been in the quiet of the night, and for just a second, she allowed herself to imagine what it would have been like to take that envelope, to solve everything in one simple moment, to erase the fear sitting just beneath the surface of every day. And the thought lingered longer than she wanted it to, long enough that guilt crept in right behind it, sharp and immediate, and she shook her head slightly as if to clear it, her grip tightening just a little on her mother's hand. "I have to get to work soon," she said quietly, more to herself than anything else, and her mother looked at her with that same knowing expression from the night before, soft but certain. "You will be okay," she said gently, and Lily nodded, even though she did not know if that was true. Even though the future still felt uncertain in ways she could not fix with hard work or long hours, but Something inside her had shifted, something small but steady, like a thread she could hold onto even when everything else felt like it was slipping. And as she stood up and moved toward the kitchen to start the day, she found herself glancing at the folded receipt she had left on the counter the night before, the ink still clear, the words unchanged. "Thank you for reminding me what matters," and for reasons she could not explain, she reached out and picked it up, holding it for just a second. Longer than necessary, as if it meant more now than it had before, as if it was not just a message, but a promise waiting to unfold. By the time Lily stepped back into the diner that afternoon, the familiar bell above the door chimed with a hollow echo that felt louder than usual, as if the place itself was aware that something had changed, even if no one else had said it out loud yet, and she paused just inside the entrance for half a second, her hand still on the door, her eyes scanning the room instinctively, not because she expected to see him again, but because a part of her could not help looking. Booth 7 sitting exactly where it had been the night before, empty now, clean, ordinary, like nothing extraordinary had ever happened there, and yet her chest tightened slightly at the sight of it, a quiet reminder that something that still had not settled into something she could fully understand. "You are late," Carl's voice cut across the room again, sharp and immediate, pulling her back into the present, and Lily turned toward the counter, already tying her apron around her waist as she walked. "I am on time," she replied calmly, though her voice carried a quiet edge she did not usually show, and Carl gave her a look that lingered just long enough to make his disapproval clear. "We need to talk about last night," he said, lowering his voice slightly but not enough to keep the tension out of it, and Lily nodded once, already expecting it, already prepared for whatever came next. "I know," she said, keeping her tone even, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence between them filled only by the low hum of the coffee machines and the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen, until Carl finally exhaled and leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You put me in a bad position," he said, his voice no longer sharp, but heavy with something more practical, more grounded in reality. "We have rules here, Lily, and you cannot just ignore them because you feel like it." And Lily held his gaze, not defensive, not apologetic, just steady. "I did not ignore anything," she replied quietly. "I made a choice," and something about the way she said it made Carl pause, just for a second, like he had not expected that answer, like he had expected excuses or regret, but instead he was met with something else entirely, something firmer, something harder to push against, and he shook his head slightly, as if trying to dismiss it. "Choices have consequences," he said, "and right now, I do not know if I can trust you on this floor," and the words landed exactly where they were meant to, not loud, not dramatic, but final in a way that made Lily's stomach tighten, and for a brief moment, she felt the weight of everything pressing in again: the rent, the bills, her mother, the fragile balance she had been holding together for so long now, and she could feel the familiar urge to back down, to apologize, to say whatever she needed to say to keep things stable, but instead, she took a small breath and met his eyes again. "If doing the right thing makes me someone you cannot trust," she said softly, "then maybe we are not talking about the same kind of trust." And the words hung there, unexpected and unpolished, and Carl stared at her for a moment longer than necessary, as if weighing something he could not quite put into words, before finally straightening up and letting out a quiet breath. "Just get to work," he said, his tone shifting back to something neutral, though not entirely unchanged, and Lily nodded, turning away without another word, her hands moving automatically now as she picked up a tray and stepped back into the rhythm of the diner, the orders, the movement, the quiet exchanges with customers who did not know anything about what had happened the night before, who did not know how close she had come to changing everything for herself and chose not to, and for a while, it almost felt like nothing had changed, like life had simply continued forward the way it always did, until the door chimed again sometime past noon, and Lily glanced up out of habit, her breath catching just slightly when she saw a man in a tailored suit step inside, his presence immediately shifting the energy of the room, not because he was loud or demanding, but because everything about him carried a quiet confidence that did not belong in a place like this. And he paused just inside the entrance, his gaze moving slowly across the diner until it landed on her, steady and unmistakable, and even from across the room, Lily felt it, that same awareness, that same quiet certainty that had been there the night before, only now it was different, clearer, undeniable, and for the first time, she realized that whatever had started in that booth had not ended when he walked out, it had only just begun. The moment stretched thin as the man in the tailored suit took a few calm steps into the diner, the quiet confidence around him drawing subtle attention from nearly every corner of the room without a single word spoken, and Lily felt her grip tighten slightly around the tray in her hands as recognition settled in, not from what he looked like before, but from the way he carried himself now, composed, deliberate, unmistakably in control of every detail around him, and for a brief second she wondered if she had imagined the night before, if maybe she had filled in the blanks with something that was never truly there, but the way his eyes remained locked on hers told her otherwise, steady and certain, as if he had walked back into her life with intention rather than coincidence, and her heartbeat picked up just enough to make her aware of it as she slowly set the tray down on the counter, her movements careful, measured, while Carl straightened almost immediately behind her, his posture shifting in a way that revealed he recognized something important even if he did not yet know what. "Good afternoon, sir," Carl said quickly, stepping forward with a polished smile he rarely used. "Welcome in," and the man gave a small nod, his attention still on Lily as he spoke. "I am looking for someone," he said, his voice calm, controlled, carrying just enough authority to quiet the low hum of the room without effort, and Carl followed his gaze, his smile faltering slightly as he turned toward Lily. "She is right here," he replied, though his tone carried a hint of uncertainty now, and Lily felt every pair of nearby eyes shift toward her, the sudden attention pressing in from all sides as she stepped forward. Slowly, her hands now empty, her expression composed even as questions raced quietly beneath the surface. "You came back," she said, her voice soft but steady, and the man allowed the faintest hint of a smile to touch his expression, though it did not quite reach his eyes. "I told you," he replied, "choices have consequences," and something about the way he said it sent a subtle tension through the air, not threatening, but significant, like a moment that mattered more than it appeared on the surface, and Carl glanced between them, confusion now fully visible. "Do you two know each other?" he asked, his voice cautious, and the man finally shifted his attention toward him, his posture straightening just slightly as if stepping into a different role without effort. "Not formally," he said, "but I believe your employee made a decision last night that deserves to be acknowledged," and Carl's expression tightened, his earlier irritation returning in a more controlled form. "If this is about what happened, I have already addressed it," he said quickly. "We have policies here," but the man raised a hand slightly, not to interrupt forcefully, but enough to pause him, and the room seemed to follow that motion instinctively, quieting further. "I am not here about your policies," he said calmly. "I am here because she passed a test that very few people would," and Lily felt her breath catch just slightly at the word test, the memory of the envelope flashing back with sudden clarity, and Carl frowned, clearly trying to understand what he was hearing. "Test," he repeated, and the man reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, pulling out a sleek business card and placing it gently on the counter between them, turning it so the name faced outward, and for a second, no one moved, until Carl glanced down at it, his eyes scanning the text, and whatever he saw there caused his entire posture to shift, his shoulders stiffening, his expression draining of the irritation that had been there just moments ago, replaced now with something closer to disbelief. "Ethan Cole," he said slowly, the name sounding unfamiliar and yet heavy at the same time, and Lily's gaze dropped to the card as well, her mind catching up a fraction of a second later as the pieces fell into place, the quiet confidence, the calm authority, the deliberate way he had watched her the night before, and suddenly the question, the envelope, the test, all of it made sense in a way that felt almost overwhelming, and when she looked back up at him, her eyes searching his face for confirmation, he met her gaze without hesitation. "Yes," he said simply, and the weight of that single word settled into the room like a shift in gravity, changing everything without raising his voice even once. The silence that followed his name was not loud, but it was absolute, like the entire diner had shifted into a different reality without anyone quite knowing how to react to it, and Lily felt her pulse steady and unsteady at the same time, her thoughts racing to catch up with the truth standing right in front of her. The same man who had sat quietly in booth 7 the night before now standing in a tailored suit that made it impossible to ignore who he really was, and yet somehow, the calm in his eyes had not changed, the way he looked at her had not changed, and that was what unsettled her the most. "You tested me," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper but clear enough to carry in the quiet space between them, and Ethan did not look away, did not soften the truth or dress it up into something easier. He simply nodded once. "I did," he replied, his tone steady, "and you answered in a way I have not seen in a very long time," and Lily felt a flicker of something rise in her chest, not anger exactly, but something close to it, something rooted in the weight of what she had risked. You gave me $10,000 and watched to see if I would give it away, she said, her voice stronger now, and Carl shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly unsure where this was going, but Ethan remained calm, his expression unchanged. I gave you a choice, he said, the same choice people face every day, just without the disguise, and Lily let out a quiet breath, shaking her head slightly. That is not the same thing, she replied. You already knew the outcome mattered to you. I did not, and for the first time, something in Ethan's expression shifted, subtle but real, like he was considering her words more carefully than anything else that had been said so far. That is exactly why it mattered, he said after a moment, and the sincerity in his voice caught her off guard just enough to quiet the argument forming on her lips, and the room seemed to hold that moment between them, the tension not hostile, but charged with something deeper, something unresolved, until Ethan reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a thin folder and placing it gently on the counter, the motion calm but deliberate. I am not here to take anything from you, he said, his voice softer now. I am here to give you an opportunity, and Lily's eyes dropped to the folder, hesitation flickering across her face. What kind of opportunity, she asked, cautious but curious despite herself, and Ethan met her gaze again, his tone steady. A position within my foundation, he said, a program built around what you demonstrated last night, real decision-making, real impact, not theory, not numbers on a page, but people, real people, and Lily's brows furrowed slightly, her mind trying to process what he was offering. You do not even know me, she said quietly, echoing the words from the night before, and Ethan gave the faintest hint of a smile. I know enough, he replied, and something about that answer lingered between them, familiar, almost mirrored, and Carl finally stepped forward, unable to hold back any longer, his voice now careful, almost cautious in a way Lily had never heard before. Mr. Cole, with all due respect, she works here, she has responsibilities, he said. And Ethan turned his attention to him briefly, his tone polite but firm, and she will continue to have them, just not under limitations that punish her for doing the right thing, he said, and the word settled into the room with quiet authority, and Lily felt the weight of the moment press in again, different now, not the weight of losing something, but the weight of stepping into something unknown, something bigger than she had planned for, and her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the counter as she looked down at the folder again, then back up at him, searching for something she could trust, something she could hold on to in all of this uncertainty, and what she found was not pressure, not expectation, but something steadier, something patient, like he was not asking her to prove anything anymore, only to decide, and for the first time since he walked in, Lily realized that this was not about the test anymore, this was about what came after it, and that was a choice only she could make. The folder remained unopened between them for a few seconds that felt longer than they should have, and Lily could feel the quiet pressure of the moment settling in, not from Ethan, not from Carl, but from something deeper, something inside her that understood this was not just about a job or an opportunity, it was about the direction her life could take from this point forward, and she slowly reached out, her fingers brushing against the smooth edge of the folder before pulling it closer, her movements careful, deliberate, as if rushing might somehow make it less real, and when she finally opened it, the pages inside were clean, precise, outlining a role that did not feel like something meant for someone like her, a position in a foundation that focused on real community impact, direct support programs, decision-making based on compassion rather than numbers, and for a moment she simply stared at it, her eyes scanning the words without fully processing them, until one line caught her attention and held it, one wish initiative, and something in her chest shifted again, quieter this time, but just as real, and she looked up at Ethan, her voice steady but softer than before. You built this, from last night, she asked, and he shook his head slightly. I started it a long time ago, he replied, but last night reminded me what it was supposed to be, and the honesty in his answer settled into her in a way she could not ignore, and she glanced back down at the folder, her mind moving through everything it represented, the chance to help people like the woman in the diner, the chance to do something that mattered beyond just getting through the day, but also the reality she could not escape, the rent, the bills, her mother's health, the fragile stability she had been holding together for so long, and she closed the folder gently, exhaling slowly before meeting his gaze again. What happens if I say yes? She asked, and Ethan did not hesitate. Then we make sure your life is stable enough for you to focus on helping others, he said, his tone calm, not like a promise meant to impress, but a statement meant to be trusted. Your mother's care will be covered, your living situation secured, and you will have the resources to do this properly. And Lily felt her breath catch slightly at the mention of her mother, the one detail she had not said out loud here, the one truth she carried quietly every day, and for a second she wondered how much he knew, how much he had seen beyond that one moment in the diner, and she swallowed, her voice softer now. "And if I say no?" she asked, and Ethan gave a small nod, his expression unchanged. "Then nothing changes," he said. "You walk away, and I respect your decision completely." And that answer, simple as it was, settled something in her that she had not realized was tense, because there was no pressure in it, no expectation, just a choice, the same kind of choice he had given her the night before, but this time, it was not about proving anything, it was about building something. And Lily looked down at the folder one more time, then at the receipt still tucked in her apron pocket, the words written there echoing quietly in her mind, "Thank you for reminding me what matters," and she let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing just slightly as clarity began to take shape. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough for her to understand what she was choosing this time, and she reached forward, closing the distance between them by just a few inches as she placed her hand lightly on the folder, her gaze steady as it met his. "I am not saying yes because of the money," she said quietly, "and I am not saying yes because of what you can fix," and Ethan held her gaze without interruption, listening, and she continued, her voice calm but firm, "I am saying yes because I know what it feels like to need help and not have it, and if this gives me the chance to change that for someone else, then that is something I cannot walk away from." And for the first time since he had walked in, Ethan's expression shifted in a way that was not controlled, not measured, but real, a quiet acknowledgement that she had not only passed his test, but had fully stepped into what came after it, and he gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. "Then welcome," he said simply, and the weight of everything that had started in that small diner booth settled into something new, something steady, something that no longer felt like a question waiting to be answered, but a path already chosen. And as Lily stood there, the noise of the diner slowly returning around them, she realized that the life she thought she could not afford to risk had just changed in the one way she never expected, not by taking something for herself, but by choosing to give it away.